Good morning, everyone. So today you and I are going to talk about testing. So let's get into it. Now, this is not going to be a video about TDD or anything like integration testing or anything like that. This is going to be a QA-oriented video. So what is QA? QA stands for quality assurance, and it is the sort of field that you go into if you are the sort of person who wants to, well, you basically, it's the sort of field where you make sure that the application has a certain level of quality. What does that mean? Well, it means more than you may think. Now, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that a QA person is just a glorified tester. That's not true. A tester and a QA person, the distinction is a little bit subtle, but virtually the idea is that you assert quality of the product. One aspect of that is to test the thing that you are actually making sure that it holds a certain level of standard. But it's the same type of deal with work processes, assuring that you have a good process for delivering software, all these other things that go into making sure that a product is high quality. So with that defined, I want to talk to you a little bit about I would say the two most important tips that I learned, or actually no, let's call it three. When I was working for my previous company, I was working at Ticketmaster, I met my first QA, I got to work with my first QA team. And these people, or like my colleagues, were absolutely lovely people. And at first, I made the mistake of thinking that virtually most of what they did was to verify that the software that the developers were writing was working correctly. And it was by trying to understand more and more about what they were doing and so forth, and interacting over, well, virtually, it didn't take long until I realized that there was more to it. Because, I was a novice, of course, and I hadn't really experienced any type of working relationship like that before. And apart from having, the colleagues were very nice, and I found it's actually there where I kind of realized how immensely valuable it is to have somebody who helps you out with verifying that your software works. And let me just tell you why. This is what I argue. I argue that if you are a part of a software team, even if you don't have a QA person, it is vital. It is absolutely vital. We have the same processes at my startup, even at a smaller company, that it's a fraction of the size of something as big as my previous job. We have the rule that you are not allowed to test your own code. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't verify it yourself. The process is this. You add code to the code base, test it accordingly, depending on whether or not it's warranted. You locally, for yourself, assure that it works the way that you expect it. You push things to a code review, somebody reviews it, and then you do manual testing. But that manual testing is going to be performed by another person. Why is this important? Well, it is important that you don't test your own code because you know what to expect. That's bad. That's really, really, really bad. Ideally, you want a fairly non-technical person that has absolutely no idea, apart from maybe the story description. They kind of know what you were supposed to be, what the feature is about. You want that person to test it because that is the closest thing to a real user that you have. And what's even better, and that's actually why I have to I remember just before they shut down the office, we had a new hire, a new QA, and she and I got to talking. She was a very, very lovely. She was very lovely, and I remember saying to, because she was so overwhelmed. You can imagine going into being a QA at one of the world's largest companies for one of the largest products in the world, and learning all those systems. That is a tricky thing, because this is a little bit of a luxury for a lot of developers. It's not always the case, but as a developer, you have a fairly, not always, but for the most part, you have a very well-defined area of expertise, an area of responsibility, where you can be an expert on the code or a specific part of the code. But as a QA, you don't have that luxury, because your job is to assert the quality of the entire product, which means that if you have a really large product, there is so much to learn. There is I remember she felt a little bit overwhelmed. I mean, I did too. I had been there for almost 2 years, and I didn't know all the stuff that she had to learn. So, and why this is powerful when you have a testing environment where somebody like a QA is testing your code, is that they will ask the right questions. Let's take, for example, that let's say that you're building a login form. Odds are, this is a classic one, so standard, so common, that a developer will forget to do basic validation checking or basic security checks on the login form. Have you checked that there's a minimum amount of character requirements? Have you checked that there are a maximum requirement or a limit to how many characters you can input? Have you checked that you're escaping, protecting from XSS attacks? All that type of stuff. Those are the sort of things that a QA can help you out with, or rather, those are the sort of things that people with a little bit more expertise will help you out with. But for the most part, the biggest value is that they will use the system without knowing how the code works, and that's the most important part. So the 3 most important tips I ever got from my colleagues at least from what I think, was first from my colleagues, my QA colleagues at my previous job, was the following. First and foremost, we were working in the browser, of course, and I was introduced to the concept of a testing matrix, which I thought was absolutely genius. It's basically just a spreadsheet where the y-axis contains, each row on the y-axis is just a different testing vertical, basically things such as making sure that the payment flow is working, making sure that the logging is working, making sure, like, basically just a series of steps of things that you need to assert works correctly before you ship the product. And then on the x-axis, you would have all the different devices and browsers that you needed to do this testing in, which is not something that's all that fun. A lot of developers kind of go, do I have to test it in all the browsers? Well, if your company doesn't care about consistency across all devices, then no. But if they do, you just have to swallow that pill and do it. And the testing matrix was one of my favorite ways of just making sure that because you forget stuff, right? And just being able to check that, yeah, I tested that thing in that browser, I tested it in that browser. It's very efficient, and it can be done in just a very simple Excel sheet or something. Loved that. That was a great idea. Second thing I thought was extremely useful was to have a bug reporting template. The worst thing in the world, which is I'm trying to get that sold on at my current company, because we get so many bug reports from non-technical people, and what they do, they usually just send us a screenshot and say, hey, this is not working. And we have to have this meaningless dialogue. Okay, so what were you doing? How did it happen? All these questions. And the outline or the template that I was introduced to at Ticketmaster was basically that you have, first and foremost, you have a screenshot with the highlighted area. If it's a visual thing, you have a screenshot with the thing that is a problem highlighted, so you can immediately see, hey, that's the thing that's wrong. And then you have a steps to reproduce list. Basically, you step by step walk through all the things that you did up until you saw that issue, and then you say, all right, the expected, what you expected outcome of this is this, and then finally you say what's actually happening. It's such a simple thing, but it it saved us so much time. We cut down so much on all this having to go. It's like when your grandma calls you and says, Frederick, my computer doesn't work, and I go, okay, what's wrong? Well, there's an error box. It says error X220 something. Okay, what's wrong? I have no idea. I have no idea. Because now I have to do a lot of investigation, and it's very time-saving if somebody has done a little bit of prep work, so you can because, guys, a bug that you cannot reproduce is a bug that you can't fix. It's that simple. You have to be able to reproduce it, so it's very helpful to have these steps. Whenever to anybody who's trying to report a bug to developers, just do this. It helps us a lot. And finally, one of the most important things tips that I got from my QA colleagues at Ticketmaster was basic when it comes to having a quality assurance type of process, is to virtually have, it's called the 5 whys, and it's very similar to what we call a post-mortem. So a post-mortem is basically that, let's say that you had a critical issue in your application, something went wrong really, really bad. And so the 5 whys idea is that you ask the fundamental question, why did this happen? And what usually happens, and it's actually funny because it actually went exactly as it was described. So they asked us, why did this happen? And the developers would say, well, it happened because of this. And then they asked, why did that happen? And then they said, most likely because of this. And then they asked why again. So the idea, if you ask that question 5 times, if you ask why to five times, in response to all of the explanations, you will actually get down to the root of the problem, what the core issue is. And usually what you get then is an action point. And an action point, for the juniors out there, it's a very popular term for something concrete, because a lot of meetings are just talk, and an action point is just something that you will do in order to fix this. So a 5 why session was actually extremely helpful, and I use it at my company as well now. So this is what I want you to take away from this. Never test your own code. Make sure that somebody else is doing it. Have a testing matrix for all of the things that you want to make sure are working, and make sure what devices and browsers you're supporting. Have a bug reporting template. And finally, if something goes really, really bad, use a post-mortem or a 5 why session to figure out what you can do to never make that happen ever again. Have a great day.